For each fight on this weekend's upcoming card, including for the prelims, I'm going to be comparing stats, reviewing recent fighter history, analyzing the results of my 7 data science prediction models, and giving a combined weighted prediction based on those models. I'll also provide my final prediction combining both quantitative and qualitative information together. Later this week, I'll upload a video covering promising underdogs, best and expensive favorites, and prop bets for y'all to consider, which I'll highlight some great opportunities for you guys. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, find value bets, or just informative and entertainment purposes to prepare for the lead up to this weekend's event. Please like and subscribe if you find this content interesting, informative, or helpful. It helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you'd like to support the channel through that. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which will give you early access to all of the analysis and results for my videos, as well as additional data analysis and stats. So that includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best and expensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and a deep dive into each fighter's record history and an analysis through each of their individual historical fights. So you'll get all sorts of stats and data analysis which will help you with your picks and bets. And for $20 a month, which is around $5 per event, you can get all of that information. You can purchase event analysis separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping improve and expand the content of this channel. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, and updating the site takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate your support. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. It truly means the world to me that we can share our passion for MMA and continue to build this community together. The last thing that I want to mention is that there is a BetUS promotion in the description below. If you use that link, it's an affiliate link, so if you set up your account, you'll get a promotional offer with that. I'm excited to continue working on this analysis and content for you all. Thank you guys again for all of your support. Let's go ahead and dive right into the predictions. For the first fight, we actually have a rematch between Stephanie Luciano versus Talita Alencar. Let's go ahead and review their stats here. Stephanie is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches, and she's 24 years old. Now, on the other hand, Talita is 5 feet 1 inch tall, so she has a 5-inch height disadvantage. She has a reach of 58 inches, so she has a 7-inch reach disadvantage, and she's 33 years old, so she is 9 years older. Now, before we get into the fighting stats, I do want to let you guys know that Stephanie Luciano's stats come from that one fight, so only one fight is taken into account when it comes to her statistics. I think that's very important to give you guys that context. Otherwise, it's kind of skewed, there's not really an average, it's just her performance in that one fight. Anyways, when it comes to striking, Stephanie lands 5.8 strikes per minute with a 57% accuracy, and Talita, on the other hand, only lands 2.37 strikes per minute at a much lower 28% accuracy. Now, as far as grappling goes, Stephanie lands 1 takedown on average with a decent accuracy, while Talita, on the other hand, lands 2.5 takedowns on average, but with a low 15% accuracy. Now, lastly, when it comes to defense, Stephanie absorbs 2.33 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and an 83% takedown defense, whereas Talita absorbs 4.8 strikes per minute with a lower 48% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. Now let's go ahead and check out Stephanie's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a draw, and that is against Talita Alencar, so this was their first fight, and that ended in a draw, and that was back in September 2023. Now, her total record is 5 wins and only 1 loss. Her 5 wins are separated by 2 KO/TKOs, 3 decision victories, which gives her a 40% finishing rate, and her only loss was a decision loss. She has won 3 out of her last 5 fights, and she is coming off that draw into this fight. Her most recent win was actually back in November of 2022, and her most recent loss was in January of 2022. Now let's take a look at Talita's recent fight history. Recently, Talita is coming off of a win against Ryan Dos Santos, which was via split decision, and that was back in December of 2023. Now, she's undefeated. Her total record is 5 wins and no losses. Now, her 5 wins are broken down by 3 submissions and 2 decision victories, which gives her a 60% finishing rate. She does have 2 first-round finishes. Recently, she's done really well. She's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she is coming off of a win into this fight. And again, her most recent win was back in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted for this fight, the weighted average of those models, and then my final pick that takes that and also incorporates other non-statistical based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that stuff into account as well. So you get a quantitative plus qualitative well-rounded pick combined. So 6 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Stephanie, and none of them are leaning towards Talita. And when we weigh those prediction models together, we actually get a 64.3% probability of victory for Stephanie. Now for my final prediction, I am giving Stephanie a slightly less confident 59% probability of victory. I docked 5%, and that's due to the fact that Talita does land 1.5 more takedowns on average, and that might have an impact on this fight. But the reason I am picking Stephanie is due to the fact that Stephanie does have that height advantage of 5 inches. She is 9 years younger, which is huge in MMA. She has a reach advantage of 7 inches, and that kind of advantage, you're going to end up using that whether you intend to or not. That's such a huge discrepancy. And not only does she have that physical advantage, but she also lands 3.43 more strikes per minute. She has a 29% higher striking accuracy. She absorbs 2.47 less strikes per minute, has a 13% higher striking defense, has an 85% higher takedown accuracy, and a 33% higher takedown defense. I mean, that's a pretty strong case. She also has won 5 fights and she's finished 40% of them. She hasn't really been tested within the UFC itself, but recently she has won 3 out of her last 5 fights. Now, I do want to give you guys reasons aside from stats alone, because I don't think that you can lean too heavily on stats, especially when one of these fighters' stats come from only one fight. So I want to give you guys the full picture here. I think that Stephanie has a very well-rounded skill set, especially when I look back at her fight. She has a good striking accuracy. She's youthful in the way that she moves and fights, and I think that that is going to give her the edge over Talita. I think that Stephanie's experience against some of those diverse and better caliber opponents than Talita has faced will further improve her ability to adapt and overcome some of those different fighting styles, not only in her professional career, but in this fight particularly. Now, you do have to keep in mind, Talita does have some pretty good grappling expertise, and that's going to be a significant threat throughout this fight, especially if she's able to close the distance and take the fight to the ground and try to control it from that angle. So it is going to be kind of tough for Stephanie to do this, but she's well equipped. She has everything she needs to get this done. I'm going to take Stephanie Luciano via decision. Now for the next fight, we actually have a really good fight. We have Youssef Zalal versus Jarno Errens, or Jarno, whatever floats your boat. Let's go ahead and review their stats here. Youssef is 5 feet 10 inches tall. He has a reach of 72 inches and he's 27 years old. Now Errens, on the other hand, is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 73 inches and he's 29 years old. So he's 2 years older. He has a 1 inch height advantage and a 1 inch reach advantage. So when it comes to striking, Zalal lands 2.88 strikes per minute with a 49% accuracy. And Errens, on the other hand, lands more. He lands 3.44 strikes per minute with about the same accuracy at 46%. As far as grappling goes, Zalal lands 2.28 takedowns on average at a 34% accuracy, while Errens, on the other hand, doesn't really have any takedown or grappling stats recorded. Now when it comes to defense, Zalal absorbs 1.73 strikes per minute with a 65% striking defense and a 60% takedown defense, whereas Errens absorbs 3.36 strikes per minute with a 63% striking defense and a 28% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Youssef Zalal's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that win against Billy Quarantillo, which was via submission back in March of this year. His total record is 14 wins and 5 losses, and out of those 14 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him a respectable 79% finishing rate. Now his 5 losses, all of those were via decision. He does have 5 first-round finishes. Recently, he's done really well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 4-fight win streak coming into this fight, so he has a lot of momentum. His most recent win was back in March of this year, and his most recent loss was actually all the way back in June of 2021. Now let's take a look at Errens' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that win against Stephen Wynn via unanimous decision, and that was back in March of this year as well. His total record is 14 wins and 5 losses also, and now out of his 14 wins, 3 of them were via KO/TKO, 5 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories. So he's a little bit heavier on controlling the fight, taking it to the judges, and getting the victory that way. He does have a 57% finishing rate. Now, out of his 5 losses, 1 of them was via a submission, and the other 4 were decision losses. So sometimes taking it to the judges has not worked for the guy, but still, they have very similar records coming into this fight. Now, Errens does have 4 first-round finishes, whereas Zalal had 5. Recently, Errens has not been doing too well. He's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, but he does have some momentum. He is coming off of that win into this particular fight. His most recent win, again, was in March of this year. His most recent loss was back in August of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds all those other non-stat based research and fight film study observations and takes that into account as well. So 5 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Youssef Zalal, and only 1 is leaning towards Jarno Errens. Now when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 56% probability victory for Youssef. Now for my final prediction, I'm actually going to bump that up. I'm going to give Youssef a more confident 68% probability of victory. And that's not only because Youssef is 2 years younger, he has a 3% higher striking accuracy, but he also absorbs way less strikes per minute. He absorbs 1.63 less strikes per minute. He has a better striking defense. He has a 32% higher takedown defense, and he lands one more submission on average than Jarno. He's also won 14 fights. He's finished 78% of them, or 79% of them actually. He's won 4 of his 8 UFC fights, and that might not seem like a lot, but 8 UFC fights is still good experience. He's recently won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of that 4-fight win streak. But let's talk about those reasons, aside from stats alone, as to why Youssef Zalal will likely beat Jarno Errens. Part of it boils down to the fact that Youssef Zalal has faced better opponents overall, and recently he's had really impressive performances. Not only that, but he's a pretty well-rounded fighter if you take a look at his fighting style. I think that he also has mental toughness as a fighter. He's been through adversity. He's faced a lot of high pressure situations, and I think that just kind of further tilts the odds in his favor to win in this particular matchup. Now, I will say that Errens is an overall capable fighter, and he is going to be a bit of a challenge for Zalal, but I think that Zalal's versatility and his overall proven ability to compete at the UFC level and get some wins, I think it was 4 out of the 8, I think that just makes him the better fighter in this matchup, along with the other advantages that he carries. For example, Zalal is really good with his footwork and his speed. If you look back at his previous fights, you can see that he has great agility, he has excellent footwork. He kind of uses that to dart in and out of range when he's fighting, and that makes it very difficult for his opponents to land some of those significant strikes. He's constantly moving, he changes those angles, and I think that he's going to be able to kind of outmaneuver Errens in this fight and avoid getting hit while also landing his own strikes, and that's going to have quite a impact on how this fight's going to play out. He's also able to mix in a variety of strikes. If you take a look at his fights, he uses a very diverse striking arsenal. He uses his punches, his kicks, even his knees sometimes. He also has a pretty good rear side kick, which he loves to utilize, and I think that's going to keep Errens at bay and kind of disrupt his rhythm overall. I think that Zalal's ability to mix up his strikes and keep Errens guessing throughout the fight and create some of those openings for more significant attacks is a huge advantage for him. Now, I don't think that Zalal is going to be able to get some sort of finish in this fight, but I will say that based on his superior footwork, his diverse striking, and his really good grappling skills, I think he's going to be able to defeat Jarno Errens by taking it to the judges, controlling the fight overall, and getting that unanimous decision victory. I think he's really good with mixing up his attacks. He stays very elusive as a fighter, and he's going to look for opportunities to take the fight to the ground to control Errens where he can. For the next fight, we have Jhonata Diniz versus Karl Williams. Let's go and review their stats here. Diniz is 6 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 79 inches and is 33 years old. Now similarly, Karl Williams is 6 feet 3 inches tall, also with a reach of 79 inches, and he's slightly older at 34 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Diniz lands 4.31 strikes per minute with a 48% accuracy. And Karl Williams, on the other hand, only lands 2.87 strikes per minute, but with a slightly better accuracy of 52%. Now Diniz doesn't really have any takedown or grappling stats recorded, but Karl Williams does. He lands 4.75 takedowns on average with a 50% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to their defense, Diniz absorbs 3.92 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and an 80% takedown defense, whereas Karl absorbs 1.7 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Diniz's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that win against Austin Lane via KO/TKO back in April of 2024. He is undefeated. His total record is 7 wins and no losses. Now those 7 wins are broken down all by KO/TKO, which gives him a very impressive 100% finishing rate. He does have 6 first round finishes out of his 7 victories, and recently, of course, he's won all of his fights. He's on that 7-fight win streak. Now let's take a look at Karl Williams' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off that win against Justin Tafa, which was via unanimous decision and back in March of this year. Now his total record is pretty similar. He has 10 wins and only 1 loss. Now out of his 10 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 30% finishing rate, but still it's notable that he's able to control fights and still get the decision victory. His only loss was a submission loss. He does have 3 first round finishes. Recently he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 7-fight win streak as well. So they're both on a 7-fight win streak. That's very interesting. His most recent win was back in March of 2024, and his only loss was back in December of 2021. Now let's take a look at those prediction models, their weighted average, and then my final pick that also incorporates all the other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Diniz, and the other 5 are leaning towards Karl Williams. And when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 61.3% probability of victory for Karl Williams. And I think that's pretty fair. What I'm actually going to do, I'm going to bump that up. I'm giving Karl Williams a more confident 66% probability of victory, and there's quite a few reasons for that. Karl Williams does have a 4% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 2.22 less strikes per minute, which is key. He has a 15% higher striking defense and a 20% higher takedown defense. He's won 10 fights. He's finished 30% of them. He's won all 3 of his 3 UFC fights, recently winning all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he is on that 7-fight win streak. Also, aside from stats alone, I think that Karl Williams has the upper hand over Jhonata Diniz due to his overall extensive MMA experience. He has a really good wrestling base as well, and a high-level training environment too if you research some of his training regimen and his team. Now here's the thing. When it comes to wrestling and takedowns, he has a really good wrestling background, which he often just uses to dominate his opponents overall. Even if he's not able to kind of get that submission victory, he does incorporate it in his style and his fighting as well. He's one of those fighters where he can take you down and then maintain top control and just do some damage on you, or just kind of hold you there until he gets the victory. I know it's not very exciting, but that is part of a game plan, right? We've seen that happen time and time again, and it bores us to death, but that is an advantage that he's going to have in this matchup. He also does have pretty good cardio and endurance as well. I haven't really seen him struggle too much with his cardio, so I do think that that's an overall advantage he might have in this fight. I do like his ground control as well, and those ground and pound strikes that he uses once he gets his opponents to the ground. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Diniz is a very challenging striker, and he has a lot of knockout power as well. But I think ultimately his limited grappling experience and some of those defensive vulnerabilities that he's shown will present an opportunity for Williams to control the fight. Now, I do want to pay some respect to Diniz. He is a very good striker. He has a great background in kickboxing, and that's probably going to give him an edge when it comes to striking. I saw a lot of his fight footage, and I see that he loves using that left hook and some of those leg kicks, and they can really pile on quickly if you're not able to control the fight. So I do fear that Williams is going to be, he's going to have to kind of navigate those waters and be very careful of Diniz's kickboxing and his striking skills. Also keep in mind, Diniz does have that knockout power, so this could very well be a Diniz KO/TKO if you're looking for some value. Again, I will have a betting video coming out in a couple days here for this event, so I will speak more to that there, but I do think that overall Williams should be able to control this fight. I do like the fact that he's going to utilize his wrestling and his takedowns. I think he's going to be able to maintain top control once he gets Diniz to the ground, and then utilize some of that ground and pound that can turn the fight in his favor. I think he's going to avoid some of those standing exchanges overall, which will be wise for him. I like his cardio and endurance. I don't think that he really struggles with that. And hopefully in his training camp, he's prepared to defend some of those leg kicks that Diniz is notoriously known for. So as long as he's done his homework like we have, he should be able to control this fight and get the victory. For the next fight, we have Karol Rosa versus Pannie Kianzad. Let's go and review their stats. Karol is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 67 inches, and she's 29 years old. Now, on the other hand, Kianzad is 5 feet 7 inches tall, so she's 2 inches taller. She has a reach of 66 inches, though, so she has a 1-inch reach disadvantage, and she's 3 years older at 32 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Rosa lands 6.34 strikes per minute at a 56% accuracy, which is pretty impressive. Now, Kianzad, on the other hand, she lands only 4.74 strikes per minute with a 49% accuracy, which is still pretty decent, but not as good as Rosa. Now, as far as grappling goes, Rosa lands 1.22 takedowns with a 45% accuracy, and Kianzad, on the other hand, only lands 0.46 takedowns on average with a lower 33% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Rosa absorbs 4.78 strikes per minute, which is probably due to her aggressive style, and she does have a 49% striking defense and a 68% takedown defense. Now, Kianzad, on the other hand, she absorbs less, but she also has less output. She absorbs 3.67 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Karol's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of that loss against Irene Aldana via unanimous decision, which was back in December of last year. Her total record is 17 wins and 6 losses, and out of those 17 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 11 were decision victories, which gives her a 35% finishing rate. Now out of her 6 losses, 2 of those were via submission, and the other 4 were decision losses. She has 1 first-round finish. Recently, she hasn't done too well. She's only won 2 out of her last 5 fights, and she is coming off of a loss into this fight, so she doesn't really have the best momentum on her side. Her most recent win was back in July of 23, and her most recent loss was in December of 23. Now let's take a look at Kianzad's recent fight history. She's coming off of a loss against Macy Chiasson, which was via submission and back in March of this year. Her total record is 17 wins as well, but with 8 losses. That's 2 more losses. Now out of her 17 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, none of them were submissions, and 14 were decision victories, which gives her a 17.7% finishing rate. How exciting is this fight, guys? We have a 35% finishing fighter versus a 17% finishing fighter. Sorry for the sarcasm here. Now, out of her 8 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 3 of them were submissions, and 4 were decision losses. She does have 1 first-round finish. Recently, she hasn't done too well either. She's only won 2 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak into this fight. Her most recent win was actually all the way back in April of 2022, and her most recent loss was back in March of 2024. This isn't really an exciting fight, if I'm being honest with you guys, and you guys know I always keep it honest with you guys, so not to bash on these 2 fighters. I mean, I like watching their fights. I like watching any fights, if I'm being honest with you. It's always the highlight of my week, but this just isn't the most exciting fight. Now, what I do like is making some predictions and doing some thorough analysis. So let's go ahead and look at those prediction models, their weighted average, and then my final pick that takes that and adds all those other non-stat based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that into account as well. All 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Karol Rosa, and none of them are leaning towards Kianzad. Now, when we weigh those prediction models together, we're getting a 63% probability of victory for Karol Rosa. Now, after doing some of that research outside of stats as well, and watching their previous fights, I honestly think that that weighted average is a very fair one, as due to the fact that Karol is 3 years younger. She has a reach advantage of 1 inch, she lands 1.6 more strikes per minute, she has a 8% higher striking accuracy, she lands 0.76 more takedowns on average, has a 12% higher takedown accuracy, and a 2% higher takedown defense. So I'm not really going to shift that weighted prediction much. I think that that's a really good prediction. Karol has also won 17 fights. She's finished 35% of them. Super impressive finishing rate. Please sense my sarcasm. She's won 6 of her 9 UFC fights, and I will say, although she's not an exciting fighter, she has won 6 of her 9 UFC fights, and I think that that is a key stat. She has really good UFC experience, and she's won most of those fights. That's an impressive win rate in the UFC. So, aside from stats alone and what's on paper, I do like Rosa's Muay Thai striking. She is able to keep it aggressive when she likes, and combined with her experience with some of those better opponents, I think that that gives her an overall dominant edge over Kianzad. I like her versatility when it comes to finishing fights and her ability to exploit Kianzad's slower starts, and I think that those are advantages to keep in mind. She does have to be very careful of Kianzad's endurance and her adaptability, which might pose a threat if the fight extends to some of those later rounds. But overall, with Rosa's balanced skill set and her fighting style, I think that she will be the more advantageous fighter in this matchup and very challenging. So all things considered, I'm going to give Karol Rosa a victory via decision, and I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to go. I know the betting videos later this week, but I will say you can never go wrong by taking a women's MMA fight to go to the judges for a decision victory. Those tend to hit a lot more than if you were to pick a money line for one of the fighters. Moving along to the next fight, we have Jonny Parsons versus Yusaku Kinoshita. Let's go and review their stats here. Jonny is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches, and he's 32 years old. And on the other hand, Yusaku is 6 feet tall, so he has a great height advantage. He has a reach of 71 inches, so he has a 2-inch reach advantage, and he is 23 years old, so he's 9 years younger. Now, when it comes to striking, Jonny lands 4.65 strikes per minute with a 44% accuracy, and Yusaku, on the other hand, he lands 4.65 strikes per minute as well, but with a better accuracy of 50%. Now, as far as grappling goes, Jonny doesn't really have any takedown stats recorded, and neither does Kinoshita. And when it comes to defense, Jonny absorbs 4.89 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense, whereas Yusaku Kinoshita absorbs 5.12 strikes per minute with a 51% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. I am excited for this fight. I think this one's going to be a very fun fight. Jonny Parsons, recently, he's coming off of a win against Danny Roberts via KO/TKO, and that was back in July of last year. His total record is 9 wins and only 3 losses. Now, those 9 wins were broken down by 7 KO/TKOs, and the other 2 victories were decision victories, which does give him a 78% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKO losses, and 1 was a decision loss. He does have 3 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 5 out of his last 5 fights, and he is actually on a 6-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in July of 23, and his most recent loss was back in August of 2019, so he hasn't really lost in a while. Now let's check out Yusaku Kinoshita's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that loss against Billy Ray Goff via KO/TKO, and that was back in August of 2023. His total record is 6 wins and only 2 losses, and out of those 6 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 2 were submissions, which does give him a 100% finishing rate. And for his losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs. He does have 5 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak into this fight, so he doesn't really have momentum on his side. His most recent win was back in August of 22, and his most recent loss was in August of 23. Now let's take a look at those prediction models, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and incorporates the other non-stat based research that I do as well, and my fight film study observations. All 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Jonny Parsons, and none are leaning towards Yusaku Kinoshita. Now when I weigh those together, I'm getting an 81% probability victory for Parsons. Now for my final prediction, I'm actually going to knock that down and kind of normalize that. I think that that's very heavily skewed based on what we see on paper. I'm going to give Parsons a slightly less confident 68% probability of victory, and that's still pretty good. I mean, that's close to 70%, but I will say that Kinoshita does have a height advantage of 3 inches. He is the much younger fighter, which can have an impact on a fight, and he does have a reach advantage of 2 inches as well. And when you talk about statistical advantages, he does have a 6% higher striking accuracy. So the reason that I am picking Jonny Parsons is due to the fact that Parsons does tend to absorb less strikes per minute, about 0.23 less. He has a 9% higher striking defense, and he has a 16% higher takedown defense. He's won 9 fights. He's finished 78% of them. He's won his 1 UFC fight that he's had. He's recently won 5 out of his last 5, and he is on a 6-fight win streak. So statistically and momentum-wise, this is Parsons' fight all day. But let's talk about those reasons aside from just the stats alone. Parsons does hold a significant advantage over Yusaku Kinoshita due to his overall UFC experience, his impressive striking skills, and his recent success. I think I really like his defensive capabilities and his knockout power, and I think that that's going to make him a very challenging opponent overall, especially against someone like Kinoshita, who has obviously shown some vulnerability to strikes in his past. Now, Parsons does have to be careful. I hope that he doesn't just go in overconfident and make some mistakes with that in mind, but I do like his momentum overall, and I like his training as well. And I think that he should be able to get this fight done pretty easily. I might throw him in a parlay or something. All things considered, I'm thinking Jonny Parsons will get the victory, and it's going to be via decision. I don't think he's going to get the finish, even though he has a really good finishing rate. I think that he's going to be able to hold his own and not get finished in this fight. So I think the safe bet would be Jonny Parsons via decision. The safer bet would be Jonny Parsons money line, kind of throw him in a parlay, something of that nature. For the next fight, we have Toshiomi Kazama versus Charalampos Grigoriou. Let's go and review their stats. Kazama is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches, and he's 27 years old. And on the other hand, Grigoriou is also 5 feet 7 inches tall, but he has a reach disadvantage of 2 inches. He has a reach of 67 inches, and he is 32 years old, so he's 5 years older. Now, when it comes to striking, Kazama lands 2.22 strikes per minute at a 54% accuracy. Now, Grigoriou, on the other hand, he lands slightly less strikes per minute. He lands 2.13, but also at a very notably less accuracy of 40% versus the 54%. Now, as far as grappling goes, Kazama lands 1.51 takedowns on average at a 13% accuracy, and Grigoriou, on the other hand, he lands 3.75 takedowns on average at a 80% accuracy, which is key. Now, lastly, when it comes to defense, Kazama absorbs 3.94 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense, whereas Grigoriou absorbs 5.56 strikes per minute with a 46% striking defense and a 100% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Toshiomi Kazama's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that loss against Garrett Armfield via KO/TKO, and that was back in August of 2023. His total record is 10 wins and 4 losses, and out of those 10 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 80% finishing rate, but also diversifies the way he's able to win. Now, out of his 4 losses, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, and 1 was a decision loss. He does have 6 first-round finishes. Recently, though, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of back-to-back losses into this fight. His most recent win was back in June of 22, and his most recent loss was back in August of 23. Now let's flip over to Charalampos Grigoriou's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that loss against Chad and Helliger via unanimous decision, which was back in March of this year. His total record is 8 wins and 4 losses. Now, out of those 8 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 2 were decision victories, which does give him a respectable 75% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO loss, and the other 3 were decision losses. He does have 4 first-round finishes. Recently, he's done well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight particularly. Now, his most recent win was back in August of 23, and of course, his most recent loss was back in March of 24. Now let's flip over and see what those prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and then my final pick that takes that and adds all the other non-stat based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that good stuff into account as well. 4 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Toshiomi Kazama, and 3 are leaning towards Grigoriou. And when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 53.1% probability victory for Kazama. However, based on momentum and some other factors that I'll discuss, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here. Don't blame me. I mean, 53% is pretty narrow as is, but remember, research outside of stats is key and important. You need the statistical input, and you need that research and qualitative information as well. So I'm actually going to give Charalampos Grigoriou a 61.4% probability victory, and I'll explain myself. Grigoriou does have the better striking defense. He lands 2.24 more takedowns on average. He has a 67% higher takedown accuracy, and he has a 34% higher takedown defense. He's won 8 fights. He's finished 75% of them. Now, he hasn't won his 1 UFC fight, but recently he has won 4 of his last 5 fights. But let's talk about those reasons, aside from stats alone, that really took me away from going towards Kazama and leaning more towards Grigoriou. Here's the thing. I really like Grigoriou's knockout power in this matchup. He's able to end fights very decisively using his striking power, and he also combines that with his striking accuracy. He's able to land those powerful strikes, particularly his favorite uppercuts and those body shots that are vicious, and they really take the breath out of you. I do like his aggression and his pressure as a fighter as well. I love seeing his previous fights where he's maintained consistent pressure on his opponents, and that can overwhelm them and kind of create openings for his strikes. And I think that he also has some good takedown defense as well. I think he's improved his grappling defense over time, and that should allow him to keep the fight standing where he really excels. I will acknowledge, though, he is weak when it comes to grappling, and that is kind of concerning because Kazama is a skilled grappler, but Grigoriou has improved his grappling over time, and I think that that's going to be the key there. In order for Grigoriou to win, he has to utilize his striking power in this matchup, and his accuracy. He has to really leverage and lean on that. He has to maintain aggressive pressure constantly throughout the fight and not let Kazama get very comfortable, and he has to defend against those takedowns that Kazama will inevitably shoot for and attempt. Hopefully Grigoriou opens the fight with a lot of aggression in that first round and maybe looks for that TKO. I know that he's going to be really good when it comes to counter striking. I like his fight film footage and what I've seen with him when it comes to counter striking. He's very sharp when it comes to that. And I think that he should lean into those body shots as well, especially against a guy like Kazama. I think that that's going to have a lasting impact throughout the fight. Final verdict, I'm going to go Charalampos Grigoriou via KO/TKO. I think he gets it done early on in this fight. For the next fight, we have Nikolay Veretennikov versus Danny Barlow. Let's go and review their stats here. Nikolay is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 74 inches, and he's 34 years old. Now, on the other hand, Danny Barlow is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 79 inches, and he's 29 years old. Now, before we get into the fighting stats, I do want to let you guys know that Nikolay's stats come from only 1 fight, and it's important for me to let you guys know about that. So when it comes to striking, Nikolay lands 3.47 strikes per minute at a 65% accuracy. And Danny, on the other hand, he lands 8.8 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. Neither fighter has any kind of takedown or grappling stats recorded, but when it comes to defense, Nikolay does absorb 3.53 strikes per minute with a 56% striking accuracy and a 50% takedown accuracy, whereas Danny absorbs 3.65 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Nikolay's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Michael Morales via unanimous decision, which was back in September of 2021. Now his total record is 12 wins and 4 losses, and out of those 12 wins, 9 of them were via KO/TKO, 1 of them was a submission victory, and the other 2 were decision victories, which does give him a respectable 83% finishing rate. Out of his 4 losses, 1 of those losses was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission loss, and the other 2 were decision losses. He does have 5 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 3-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in April of 2024. His most recent loss was in September of 2021. And you're probably wondering, well, if he won in 2024, why is only his 2021 fight on here? Well, that's because he ended up going to United Fight League, which is UFL. He had 3 fights there. He won 1 via submission, 2 via KO/TKO, and now, and by the way, that most recent fight that he had against Ashley Reese was a championship level fight. But anyways, now he's back in the UFC and he's looking to win in this fight. Now let's take a look at Danny Barlow's recent fight history. He's coming off of a win against Josh Quinlan via KO/TKO, which was back in February of 2024. Now his total record is 8 wins and no losses, so he is undefeated. Out of his 8 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission victory, and the other 2 were decision victories, which does give him a pretty good 75% finishing rate. Now he does have 5 first-round finishes. Recently, of course, he's on that 8-fight win streak, and his most recent win was in February of 2024. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't run these fighters through my prediction models because of Nikolay's debut in the UFC. Even though he did have that one Dana White Contender Series fight, I can't really use the data for that in the prediction models. But when we look at what the odds are showing, they are giving Danny Barlow a 70.6% probability of victory. And I do generally agree with that because Danny Barlow does have a height advantage of 1 inch. He is 5 years younger. He has a 5-inch reach advantage as well. He lands 5.33 more strikes per minute. He has a 1% higher striking defense, which I know isn't much, but he does also have a 50% higher takedown defense. Danny's won 8 fights. He's finished 75% of them. He's won his 1 UFC fight, so he has been tested in the UFC. And recently, of course, he's won all of his fights. He's coming off of that 8-fight win streak, no losses. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. Danny does have the upper hand over Nikolay, and I think that that's going to honestly boil down to his explosive striking, his aggressive style, and his recent dominant performances. I really like the adversity that he overcame in his debut fight. If you guys don't know, in that fight, he reportedly broke his arm and dislocated his dominant left hand early on in the first round, but despite that injury, he continued to fight, and that really showed his remarkable resilience and his determination. He's definitely in the right sport, I'll tell you that. But he was able to knock down Quinlan 3 times despite all of that. Ultimately, he won the fight by knockout in the 3rd round, which is an insane story. His ability to persevere through that kind of pain and maintain his performance under such a challenging circumstance was a real testament to how tough he is as a fighter. I will say that Nikolay does have more experience as a fighter, and he's versatile too, but I will note that I've noticed a lot of inconsistency and susceptibility to some of those aggressive strikers that he's faced. And I think that that makes Barlow the perfect opponent for him, kind of like a kryptonite opponent. Barlow has the ability to dictate the pace of a fight and really capitalize on openings. And I think that ultimately that's going to give him a significant edge in this fight. He's another guy that I want to throw in a parlay of sorts. So, final verdict for Danny Barlow, I actually do think he's going to get the finish here, especially when you take a look at Nikolay's vulnerability to strikers and powerful strikers. So I'm going to take Danny Barlow via KO/TKO. I think I've done a lot of research for this fight. I like both fighters. I don't think that this is going to be a bad fight. I know that this card is pretty mild, and there's a lot of canceled fights here, so I might even have to post some updates in the comments for you guys. But this is a fight that I am looking forward to this weekend. For the next fight, we have Yana Santos versus Chelsea Chandler. Let's go and review their stats here. Yana Santos is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 68 inches, and she's 34 years old. And on the other hand, Chelsea Chandler, she lines up pretty similarly, but she is 5 feet 8 inches tall, so she has a 2-inch height advantage. But she also has the same reach of 68 inches, and she's pretty much the same age. She's 33 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Santos lands 4.16 strikes per minute at a 56% accuracy. And Chelsea Chandler, on the other hand, she lands a little bit less. She lands 3.45 strikes per minute and at a less accuracy of 45%. So when it comes to striking on paper, Santos is better. Now, as far as grappling goes, Santos lands 1.11 takedowns on average with a 53% accuracy. And Chelsea Chandler, on the other hand, kind of similar. She lands 1.31 takedowns on average, but with a little bit of a better accuracy of 60%. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Santos absorbs 3.03 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 42% takedown defense, whereas Chelsea Chandler absorbs 3.09 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 33% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Yana Santos' recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of that loss against Karol Rosa via split decision, which was back in July of 2023. Her total record is 14 wins and 8 losses, not the most impressive record if I'm being honest. Out of those 14 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was submission victory, and the other 6 were decision victories, which gives her a 57% finishing rate. And out of her 8 losses, 3 were via KO/TKO, 2 were submissions, and 3 were decision losses. She's kind of an inconsistent fighter overall. She has 7 first-round finishes. Recently, she's only won 2 out of her last 5 fights, and she's on a 3-fight losing streak coming into this fight. In fact, the most recent time she won was back in February of 2021, and the most recent time she lost was back in July of 2023. Now let's take a look at Chelsea Chandler's recent fight history. Recently, Chandler is coming off of that win against Josiane Nunes via unanimous decision, which was back in March of this year. Now, her total record is 6 wins and 2 losses. Out of those 6 wins, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission victory, and the other 3 were decision victories, which gives her a flat 50% finishing rate. Out of her 2 losses, both of those were decision losses. She does have 2 first-round finishes. Recently, she's done well. She's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she is coming off of a win into this fight. Her most recent win was back in March of 24, and her most recent loss was back in July of 23. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted for this fight, their weighted average, and then my final pick that takes that and incorporates all the other research and qualitative factors as well as fight film study observations. So only 1 of 7 of our prediction models are leaning towards Yana Santos, surprise, surprise, and 6 are leaning towards Chelsea Chandler. Honestly, I think the prediction models absolutely nailed this fight with their predictions. So when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 53.4% probability victory for Chelsea Chandler. Now, generally, I think that it is a fair prediction. I'm going to change that a little bit and make it a little bit more narrow. I'm going to give her a 52.4% probability victory. But the reason that I am leaning towards Chelsea Chandler is due to the fact that she does have a height advantage of 2 inches. She is the slightly younger fighter. She lands more takedowns on average, and she has a 7% higher takedown accuracy. Again, she's won 6 fights. She's finished half of those. She's won 2 of her 3 UFC fights, which is pretty good when you think of it as a percentage. Recently, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of that win. When it comes to momentum, she definitely has the upper hand compared to Santos's record breakdown that we did earlier. So let's talk about those reasons aside from stats alone as to why I think Chandler will defeat Santos. I like Chandler's grappling heavy style when it comes to fighting. She's had really good success recently in the UFC, and I think that she has some physical advantages that give her the upper hand against Yana Santos. Her ability to control fights on the ground matches up really well against Santos' striking-focused approach, so I think she's also a kryptonite for a fighter like Santos, especially when you consider Santos' recent struggles against wrestlers, and that's key. Remember what we always talk about when you put a wrestler and a striker together, and the striker isn't really well-rounded. What do you get? You get the wrestler victory most of the time. Now, while Santos does have overall experience, Chandler does have the momentum and the youth that will give her the significant edge heading into this matchup. I think this one's pretty easy, even though I made it kind of narrow. I would take Chandler via decision. Again, this isn't the betting video that will come later this week, but you can never go wrong with women's MMA taking the fight going the distance if you are going to bet on them. Some people avoid it altogether because of how unpredictable they can be, but if you were to put something, again, not financial advice or anything, I think I got to throw that disclaimer in here to not get in trouble, but Chelsea Chandler via decision is the way to go, bottom line. For the next fight, we have Damon Jackson versus Shep Mariscal. Let's go and review their stats here. Damon Jackson is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches, and he's 36 years old. And on the other hand, Mariscal is 5 feet 7 inches tall, so he has a 4-inch height disadvantage. He has a reach of 69 inches, so he has a 2-inch reach disadvantage, and he's 31 years old, so he is the younger fighter by 5 years. Now, when it comes to striking, Damon Jackson lands 3 strikes per minute at a 41% accuracy. And Mariscal, on the other hand, he lands more. He lands 4.7 strikes per minute at a higher accuracy of 52%. As far as grappling goes, Jackson lands 2.51 takedowns on average at a 35% accuracy, while Mariscal on the other hand lands 2.35 takedowns on average at a 28% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Jackson absorbs 3.29 strikes per minute with a 51% striking defense and a 40% takedown defense, whereas Mariscal absorbs 3.68 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Damon Jackson's recent fight history. Recently, Jackson's coming off of that win against Alexander Hernandez, which was via split decision back in April of this year. Now his total record is 23 wins and 6 losses and 1 draw. And out of his 23 wins, 15 of them were via submission, 4 of them were via KO/TKO, and the remainder were via decision. Now out of his 6 losses, 4 of them were via KO/TKO, 1 of them was a submission loss, and the other one was a decision loss. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights. He is coming off of a win into this fight against Hernandez. The last time he won was back in April of 2024, and the last time he lost was back in August of 2023. Now let's take a look at Mariscal's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that win against Morgan via split decision, which was also back in April of 2024. Now his total record is 16 wins and 6 losses, and those 16 wins are broken down by 7 KO/TKOs, 3 submissions, and 6 decision victories, which gives him a 63% finishing rate. Now, out of his 6 losses, 3 of them were via KO/TKO, and the other 3 were decision losses. He's actually on a 6-fight win streak, and the last time he lost was back in September of 2020. The last time he won was April of this year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that qualitative and quantitative stuff into account as well. So 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Damon Jackson, and the other 6 are leaning towards Mariscal. Now when I weigh those together, I'm getting a 59.4% probability victory for Mariscal. Now for my final prediction, I'm actually going to bump that up. I'm going to give Mariscal a more confident 66% probability victory. That's due to the fact that Mariscal is 5 years younger. He lands 1.7 more strikes per minute. He has 11% higher striking accuracy. He has a slightly better striking defense, and he has a 26% better takedown defense as well. Mariscal's won 16 fights. He's finished 63% of them. He's won all 3 of his 3 UFC fights, recently winning all 5 of his last 5 fights and coming off of a 6-fight win streak. In fact, the last time he lost was back in 2020. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. Mariscal has the upper hand over Damon Jackson, not only due to his current momentum, but also his versatile skill set and his strong grappling foundation as a fighter. I think his training with Elevation Fight Team really provides Mariscal with a very high level environment that enhances his overall capabilities. So I like his grappling skills. Now, Damon Jackson does have more experience and a solid wrestling base as well, but I do like Mariscal's youth, his adaptability as a fighter, and his recent success. And I think that all those things combined should lean the fight in his favor and get him another victory. So final decision, I'm taking Mariscal via decision. Now, unfortunately, we did lose our co-main event. We lost Chris Gutierrez versus Javid Basharat, which was arguably probably the best fight on this card, but we still have our main event, Marcin Tybura versus Serghei Spivac. So let me break this down for you guys, and I'll post any kind of updates in the comments. Just ask me what fights you guys are curious about. I'll do some analysis and research and then post some updates because I know there's a lot of changes on this particular card. Anyways, let's go ahead and review Tybura versus Spivac. So Tybura is 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 78 inches, and he's 38 years old. He's definitely on the end of his professional fighting career. Now, on the other hand, Serghei Spivac is also 6 feet 3 inches tall. He also has a reach of 78 inches, but he is 9 years younger at 29 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Tybura lands 3.6 strikes per minute at a 48% accuracy. Now, Spivac, on the other hand, he lands 3.54 strikes per minute at a 49% accuracy. Very similar when it comes to those striking stats. As far as grappling goes, Tybura lands 1.43 takedowns on average with a 33% accuracy. And Spivac, here's where he shines. He lands 4.56 takedowns on average at a 64% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Tybura absorbs 3.35 strikes per minute with a 55% striking defense and a 79% takedown defense, whereas Spivac absorbs 3.8 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 70% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Tybura's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that win against Tai Tuivasa, which was via submission back in March of this year. Now, his total record is 25 wins and 8 losses. And out of those 25 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and 9 were decision victories, making him a very versatile fighter and giving him a 64% finishing rate. Now, out of his 8 losses, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, and the remaining 3 were decision losses. Now, he does have 11 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and and he's coming off of that win earlier this year into this fight. His most recent win was back in March of 24, and his most recent loss was back in July of last year. Now let's take a look at Spivac's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of that loss against Serghei via KO/TKO, which was back in September of last year. His total record is 16 wins and only 4 losses, and out of those 16 wins, 7 of those were via KO/TKO. The other 7 were submissions, and the last 2 were decision victories, which gives him a very high 88% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 3 of them were KO/TKO losses, and the remaining 1 was a decision loss. He has 10 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent one was back in February of last year, and his most recent loss was in September of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that into account as well. So 5 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Tybura and 2 are leaning towards Spivac. And when I weigh those together, I'm getting a 50.8% probability of victory for Tybura. Now, after doing some research outside of statistics as well and watching previous fights, I do acknowledge that it is a very 50-50 fight. In fact, I'm actually going to drag down the weighted model prediction a little bit. And for my final prediction, I'm going to give it a 50.2% probability of victory, which I know doesn't seem like much, but I do want to kind of highlight that it's a very 50-50 fight. So the reason I am leaning towards Tybura is because he lands 0.07 more strikes per minute. He absorbs 0.44 less strikes per minute. He has a 7% higher striking defense, and he has a 10% higher takedown defense. He's won 25 fights. He's finished 64% of them. He's won 12 of his 19 fights. I don't want you guys to focus so much on his age, but I want, because he still performed really well. He's won earlier this year, and he looked really good. But I do want to really emphasize that he's had 19 UFC level fights, and he's won 12 of them, which is huge, not only for experience, but for confidence. Recently, of course, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of that win. Now, Spivac, he has not been as active as Tybura, and he is coming off of that loss to Serghei. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone and, record history. So Tybura can defeat Spivac by leveraging his extensive experience, his well-rounded striking, and his superior grappling, and utilizing all those advantages together. I also want to point out, and I should have mentioned this earlier as I started breaking down this particular fight, but this is actually a rematch between these two guys. Tybura did face Spivac back in February of 2020, and he won. It was via unanimous decision. So I really do like that as well in Tybura's favor, and I wanted to highlight that as to why I'm ever so slightly leaning towards Tybura. He is going to have to be kind of careful of Spivac's physical strength, and the fact that Spivac's probably improved his skills since then. I mean, a lot of these prediction models are very close. They're 50-50, which really just highlights how evenly matched this fight is. And also, you have to keep in mind, Tybura is old. I know I said don't focus on his age, but keep it in mind, right? That's why I am very 50-50 on this fight. I think there's some value on this particular fight. You could take Tybura via decision. You could also take Spivac via KO/TKO or decision. This one's kind of a toss-up, but the way that I'm leaning is Tybura via decision ever so slightly. I would not throw this one in a parlay at all, but this one definitely holds some value, and I think it should be entertaining in the sense that we're going to get 2 big guys who love swinging and looking for a finish. I wish that we still had that co-main event, because that was really selling this card. And when I say really selling this card, I mean that was kind of the biggest and only attraction for this card, respectfully. Some of these other fights are interesting, the ones that we've talked about, but nothing was going to beat that co-main event. Sadly, we did lose that fight, but we still have some fights this weekend, and that always beats a leap weekend where we don't have any fights at all. I hate those weekends. So we have something's better than nothing. We're going to practice some gratitude here and just try to make some money where we can. And with that, those are all of the fights for this weekend's event. I hope you all enjoyed the analysis and that your bets hit. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos. Running this data, analysis, prediction models, and creating charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so your support is always appreciated. Please also check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. There's a $10 a month contribution option and a premium $20 a month option, which comes with early access to all of the analysis from this video, as well as promising underdogs, favorites, prop bets, and all of the extra data analysis and stats as well. This analysis, information, and these stats will help you with your bets, and it'll help support my efforts to continue providing and expanding content for you all. So please check out that Patreon if you want to show me some love and help me out there. Thank you all once again for watching, and as always, see you guys in the next one.